Okay, David Coman-Hidy.
That's right.
Yes. Hey, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me in this lobby of this hotel.
Yeah, anytime. Happy to be here.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I have this podcast, as you can see. And then when I ask people at the conference, like, who should I talk to? Like, you were like the number one.
What an honor.
Yeah. People are like, oh, you should talk with Dave or David, because Dave is your nickname. Or
Yeah, most people call me Dave. You can call me Dave.
Okay, cool. So but since we just got to know each other, I'm wondering if you could introduce yourself for people. I know some of your works, but I think it would be best for
So I live in Brooklyn, New York, and before that I was in the Boston area, and that's kind of the area I grew up in. And for the last 11 or so years, I was running an international animal protection group called the Humane League, and spent that decade really growing it from just being a few people to over 100 people in the UK and Mexico and the US and Japan as well. And now these days, I've just recently started with my colleague Andrea Gunn, who is the executive vice president of the Humane League, who you've also spoken with. We just started a small organization called Sharpen Strategy, where we're trying to take a lot of the lessons that we learned growing the Humane League and share them with either small starting up animal orgs or more established orgs that are still in a phase of growth. So doing kind of like advising and consulting work on fundraising and strategy and programs and that kind of thing.
Damn. Mm-hmm. Yes. And how did you get there? And I was at your presentation, and cool. I really liked the punk part.
Mm-hmm.
So like not like your whole life story, maybe, but like how did you end up doing what you do?
I think I was always pretty interested in activism and politics. It's like I grew up in a household with my mother who's very political. So I lived in New Hampshire, which in the U.S. is like a very pivotal state in electoral politics because it's early on in the presidential election. So I volunteered on some political campaigns, and my mother would have activists sometimes stay at our house and that kind of thing. So I feel like this was formative for me. And then in college, I studied politics and wanted to work on political campaigns. But after doing that for a little while, found that it wasn't for me and that I was more interested in like the advocacy side of things. And then I went on the website Craigslist and found a job at the Humane League, when I was like a few months out of college. So it's not very helpful like advice perhaps to learn from, but I just got lucky.
But just like you can look for a job within like animal rights or like what you want to work with. I guess it can be pretty straightforward like that as well.
Totally.
And how many years did you spend in the Humane League?
It was around 11 years.
11 years. Wow. And in the end there, how many years did you run it?
I guess like 9 or 10 of those years. Yeah.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so almost straight from Craigslist into like
within like 2 years. I don't even remember the exact timeline. It was like, a lot of our old structure back then too was like it started off as the Humane League of Philadelphia. Okay. And then I started the Humane League of Boston, and there's a guy named Aaron who works at THL who does corporate work, who was running a group in Baltimore that kind of like merged with those orgs. And then Andrea, the way she started was the Humane League of like Charlotte, essentially. Yeah. So everyone was it was almost like mini executive directors in each of these cities where you're running fundraising events, running campaigns, so on and so forth. And then once we kind of spread out around the country, we were able to do these larger national campaigns to leverage the kind of like network we'd built.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And as you mentioned yesterday, I had Andrea on the podcast. And then since I want to talk with both of you from like now, like Sharpen Strategy, we talked a little bit beforehand on like she is doing like more internal stuff, you're more external. Of course, some of them overlap. But how can we like define that a little bit and touch deeper?
Well, I think, during our time at the Humane League, when Andrea was executive vice president and I was president, I think our kind of like areas of specialty and focus, like I was much more in like the programs and campaigns work. So like kind of working with the other animal organizations in coalition, figuring out the campaign strategies, thinking about communications and messaging and tactics and those kinds of things, as well as meeting with the donors, presenting the group to the media. So all of this kind of external facing stuff, as well as, of course, like the other responsibilities of the president would be like managing the board and, managing the leadership team and these kinds of things.
Yeah.
But Andrea's interest has always been more in like internal communication, how to run meetings, how to structure the organization, kind of these things that are more about, like the internal policies and working of the group and kind of management best practices and leadership and these kinds of things.
But so when you help organizations now, do you do like the meetings together, or do you like split up so you do those kinds of things and Andrea does the other? Or
so we're still pretty new. So far, we've done a few projects where we're intensively working with groups together. So we're gathering a lot of information through things like surveys and interviews.
Okay.
And then we both read it all together, kind of like synthesize our analysis together and like write up reports. But we've also done a lot of kind of ad hoc work, like
what does that mean?
Just like as things come up. So we've had groups reach out to us. It's like end of last year, there's just a bunch of groups who needed help with fundraising. So I'd help these groups write up their grant proposals or prep for donor meetings. And then Andrea, on the other hand, I think has been doing more meetings with people on like management issues that they're having and that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. Okay, I have many things I want to ask. Also, as I mentioned earlier of the podcast, right now, I'm really trying to get better at structure in my own life and in the organizations that I run as well, which are really like small organizations. But like we have received governmental funding and so on. And we now have like 4 part-time employees in one organization. And then in the other one, we will go through the like a new recruitment process soon. And the volunteers are like really like building good teams right now and so on. But I have experienced almost the same before, but didn't manage to keep that up, if that makes sense. And I feel that like I can be good at starting organizations, but I'm a little bit afraid I'm not good at running them. I'm wondering, like, do you have any like thoughts or tips around that, or is that something you've seen?
Well, I mean,
before?
this is very common for sure.
It is,
and I think it's like is one of the reasons that I eventually stepped away from the Humane League after running it, was feeling like a lot of my skills and my personality was better suited to like the smaller stages of organizations, like the kind of groups that will hopefully be helping in the coming years. Rather than the kind of skills and personality that is suited to running like a large, complex administration.
Interesting.
Or whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think like, I don't know, you think about the personality traits that make like a good entrepreneur is like being willing to do everything yourself, like being curious about learning new skills, being very hands-on and like enthusiastic about tackling projects, and also just being like stubborn and kind of like crazy in a sense of just like, I will do whatever it takes to succeed. Like, I don't care what anyone tells me. Like, oh, I'm not allowed to do that. I'll figure out a way to do it. Like, and those kinds of personality traits can make a very frustrating manager to work for or like frustrating member of a large team, because it's like, you have to have this kind of belief in yourself and your abilities, and this persistence that isn't always like frictionless working with other people potentially. So I think the main thing is just to have like a good level of self-awareness. So it's not saying it's impossible for a good entrepreneur to also be a good, manager of a large group, but you really, really need to think about how you're going to adapt your style and how you're going to structure the organization to succeed in particular, like what the culture is going to look like when it gets through this phase of like the first few years. So some of the things I would really think about are like some of the downfalls I see with like these really amazing founders a few years into their group, once they have maybe 10 staff or something like this, is a lack of delegation. Essentially, they still feel like, because they got everything started and they have this particular vision of how things should go, and because they've had the experience of having worked in all the kind of different areas of the group, that they want things done their way. And that means that they're providing way too much oversight. They're tweaking and correcting little things all the time for years down the road. And 2 things are going to happen. One is you're going to drive the people crazy who are working on the team, because they're not going to have any kind of autonomy. And the other thing you're going to see is like, they're just not going to develop as leaders themselves. I think it's not uncommon at a lot of these fast-growing groups. You have an issue where you have like this incredible group of activists who got the group started, a handful of people, and they all went through this kind of organic, rapid training process of having to figure everything out themselves, where it's like they don't have anyone managing them. They just have to teach themselves everything. They have to go through this high pressure situation together. It forms a strong team of people with diverse skills who are like very confident and strong leaders. And then they start hiring people to carry out discrete functions on the team. And they become frustrated because they're not like developing as rapidly as they did. And they're not becoming leaders as rapidly as they did. But it's because they haven't invested in the leadership development and the training of those individuals. They're still micromanaging them. They're not giving them the chance to fail. I mean, how many times have you failed trying to grow groups? Like, right. Yeah. Way more than you succeeded probably, right? Like that's just how it was for me. Like I can think back to this long history. Like, but that's good. We had the opportunity to experiment and to like go out and try things and screw up. But when you hire someone and they're doing a discrete task and you need them to do it correctly and you want them to do it like you did it, just as good, and you're frustrated when they don't, and you go in and you correct their Google Doc or you tell them what to say or these things, they're just not coming up in the same environment as the founding people of the organization. So yeah, I think you need to be really, really thoughtful. And this is something Andrea talks about a lot. But how are you going to set up the organization in a way where those people have autonomy, they're not being micromanaged, and they have the ability to develop in the way that the early employees did.
And that's a lot of the internal strategy thing, or...
I think so, yeah. It's like, think about how you want to... It overlaps a lot of areas. It's the internal strategy for growth, but it's also, a thoughtful plan for developing leaders and managers within the organization. How much autonomy you're going to give people, how much room for mistakes you have.
Yeah. And like, how was that process for you? Or like, when did you leaving THL?
When I left THL?
THL, yeah.
Well, I mean, earlier on, I struggled with this a lot because at first I was really involved in all the corporate campaigns work that the Humane League does. So we had like a big cage-free campaign on battery cages in the United States. And I was initially doing a lot of the corporate outreach where I go and meet with companies and running the campaigns. And for me, this was like my passion. This was like my favorite thing. I love doing this. And I really saw myself as like a campaigner. And over time, I think I just remained like way too involved in the campaigns. And it was mostly just because I loved it. I was very passionate about it. But I came to realize that I was really holding the group back and holding people back by kind of remaining in control of this element for too long, or kind of overstaying my welcome when I should have been focusing on like growing the board and fundraising and all these other things. So there were lots of stages of things like this during my time there. And I think the process of realization before I stepped away, I think it was realizing that like the kind of person who would be really successful at running a group at that size needed to have the passion for like the requirements of that kind of role, I guess. And for me, I missed the kind of like more granular program strategy work. The more detailed kind of campaign planning and these kinds of things.
Cool.
And I was less excited about the kind of like broader administrative work of running the group. And I think, I guess maybe a good way of putting it is like I'm just less like of a details person, maybe. And I also think like my leadership style or management style or whatever is very relational. And for me, a lot of what energized me about like the small organization in the earlier days is just like the very close relationships with the small group of people. And being a leader of a larger group requires like a very consistent and disciplined internal communication strategy. And this was something I feel like I had a harder time succeeding with just because of my personality and personal style. So I think things were fine. Like it wasn't like some shocking wake up moment, but it was just more over time realizing like, okay, I've been here for over a decade. I think it's very good for groups to have a change in leadership. But once I kind of accepted this, it was very hard. But once I accepted it, then I started to think more about like, oh yeah, like things really have changed. And like, I think that like Vicky Bond, who took over THL, I think she has just like such a good personality fit and skill set fit for the needs of the organization right now. And I think that this is very important. It's like you were saying, like to have this knowledge about yourself that maybe I'm not always the right person for the size of the group. Like maybe I'm really good at getting things started for the first few years and then handing things over. Like maybe that's true about you, maybe it's not. But this is like healthy to realize this. You know, so many people just think like, well, I'll just adapt forever and be, you know, that you look at groups where the leaders have been there for many decades. Sure. Sometimes it works, but often it's a disaster.
Oof. And so one thing I've been thinking about is like prepping others in the organization to like take over the organization, or like right now the deal that I have is like you can say like really shitty. Like nobody wants my pay to do my work right now.
Sure.
And since I also started the organization, I guess like I have this other like romantic relationship with it.
Of course,
which is hard to like give away, I think.
100%.
But how, or like, do you have any tips or thoughts on how to do that, to like prep for the next one to come? Like I can say one thing now is that I think this year or maybe next year we will have the possibility to that like we have enough money to hire maybe one full-time. Like as I said, now we have 4 part-time because we think that's a better way than hire one full-time. But yeah, so that's like one plan, just getting enough money so that the leading role will actually be like a normal salary.
Well, it's very complicated. And of course, like it's going to always be contextual to the organization and the kind of work it does, where it's at, the structure, the size. But one thing I'll say is like, I think having a really strong board of directors, this is a really important thing to establish before the founder steps away or before there's a change in leadership. So I'm not exactly sure what the laws are here in terms of like the structure of a nonprofit. Is there like a board of directors that oversees the group?
Yeah, or a board at least.
A board.
Is that the same maybe?
Yeah, so essentially like volunteer positions who are overseeing the budget and the bylaws and these things?
Okay. Yeah.
So what I really...
It's the same right now, but like... Yeah.
So often what you see is like when a group is founded, the board of directors are, or the board are just, you know, people's friends or whatever. You're convenient. Like, I need to do this paperwork, you know, it's like, you know, your girlfriend and your cousin or whatever, and they're just like signing the paperwork.
That's how I started.
100%. So that's very common. But for me, like best practices that are going to ensure success of like a continued leaders coming into the organization is having this foundation of a really strong board. So you want to have like a set of different skills and people who can act as advisors to the leader. So these are people who are going to, it's like 2 things that they're really going to be providing. One is the oversight there. So you want to, like if someone takes over for you, you want them to have a group of people looking at their performance, giving them an annual review, checking in with the staff to see how they're doing, giving them feedback to help them grow in the way that you were able to grow just through all the feedback of starting the organization and you know, having mistakes and those kinds of things. So this is really important. Like they act as a manager for this person to ensure the success of the group. And the other thing that they're going to do is provide advice and support. So, you know, I love to see a board with like an experienced attorney who's going to be able to answer questions about, you know, legal risk and how to structure things. It'd be great to have like a CEO of some type on the board, someone who's managed a big group, who can give advice about hiring and leadership and that kind of thing. It might be great to have like, depending on the, like, so for the Humane League, it was great to have people who are very knowledgeable about certain areas of our work who can give advice there. I mean, you can kind of pick and choose based on the needs of the group, but you want to have people with a lot of experience that the leader can go to and get help and advice from, and who can also provide oversight and give them advice and point them in the right direction for training. So I think if you have a really strong board, it takes a little bit of the pressure off of you of like, I need to have this person like perfectly ready, so when I step away, they can do exactly what I was doing. It's more about like creating a stronger structure for them so that there isn't as much weight on their shoulders, I think, where it's a little bit of a distribution of the responsibility of the group, because the board is like making sure the budget is correct, making sure the strategic plan is good, and asking the hard questions, and you know, taking a little bit of the responsibility. So I think that's one really important thing. And then beyond that, like the specific situation, it really depends on if there's an obvious successor within the organization, or if you're going to have a process where you hire someone and bring someone from outside. And it depends on how big the group is. I read this book, The CEO was it the nonprofit CEO succession handbook or something like this? It was just like a self-publishing on Amazon I found, but cool. Of the books I looked at, this was the best one I found, and it was very, very useful for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh wow. Thank you for the tips. Also advisory board versus board, do you have any thoughts there?
Well, so each country is going to be different, but for me, when I think of these terms, a board is like a part of the legal structure of the organization. So these are officers who have like actual legal responsibilities to the organization to review the budget and everything. And then an advisory board is like a group of volunteers, and this can mean a lot of different things to different groups. But generally, these would just be people who kind of give advice to the strategy or something. So like, let's say if you're like an environmental advocacy group, you might have an advisory board who's made up a bunch of climate scientists or something. And they would advise the group on what kind of policies to recommend or something like that. But they don't have any power to like review the executive director or look at the budget or anything.
Cool. Yeah. We don't have an advisory board, but I did another startup one time. And then one of the first things we did was having an advisory board. That was like a business, or like a vegan business.
Yeah. I mean, an advisory board, it can be a great tool because not only, there's the obvious benefit of like you can get advice from smart people, but it's also a great engagement tool because if it's like prestigious for people to be on an advisory board, that you might be able to engage with someone kind of in a prestigious position or something that otherwise would be hard to.
And it's not like that you don't like joining the board is more of a big ask.
Oh yeah,
than
very
just
much.
Like advisory board.
Totally. When you're looking for full board members, I think it's we had a very intensive process. Like it was like a hiring process, because it's like the most important positions besides the executive director in some ways. And we had to make sure they were a really good fit for the org. And a big part of that is like, are they seriously able to put the time aside? So you might have the perfect person, but if they're just too busy, it's not going to be good. Because the board, what I often see is usually it's not that much of a time commitment. It's like, if you do a quarterly board meeting, that's like a few hours every quarter, maybe a few hours of prep, maybe 1 or 2 check-ins in the middle of that quarter. But if something goes wrong, or if there's a big process, or like the budget is confusing one year and you need a time, you need them to be able to say like, this is a priority for me and I'm setting aside like a lot of time this week to work on this.
Wow. Okay. Back to the external stuff.
Yes.
What are some other external topics?
Well, I think it depends on the group, of course, but like essentially you're talking about managing your different like stakeholders or like the community that interacts with your group. So for me at the Humane League, that involved kind of like the friendly stakeholders. So these are like our donors and supporters, especially the other organizations we work with, because we are such a coalition-focused group. So maintaining relationships with the other executive directors or the key staff at different organizations. And the media, maintaining a relationship with journalists. And then you've got the kind of like adversarial folks, like so the companies that we campaign against and this kind of thing. But this is really going to depend on who you're working with. But yeah, it's like representing the group to the public, basically.
Representing, okay. And what are some of the main topics to break that down again? To focus on, like I can also say I don't have much experience in or like we don't have any donors. Or like we're like maybe my friend sometime
Okay. Is that something you're trying to change?
Yeah, I think so. Because we when we started the first organization, World Saving Hustle, we were like, we're never gonna have a membership fee. Like it should be free, and we don't want to take salary. Like we were like really like idealistically thinking about like this utopia, I guess, and then we changed a little bit, like, okay, like nobody want to do the boring administrative work, so we should probably pay somebody to do it, or get a little bit money ourselves to do it. And then we understood how much funding we can get by the Norwegian government if we have members, so we changed that as well. We started to have membership fee of like $5 a year, because that's the lowest amount.
Reasonable,
which is legal in Norway. And then all the other organizations we work with, they have like donors, and they have like this, you can pay every month, like membership thing. We don't have that yet. So yeah, we are open to it. It feels like we're a little bit, or like we just really love the idea still of not taking too much money from the individual, but trying to get more funding from the government and like from, like stuff like that.
Do you know like the culture of philanthropy here? Like how common it is for people to give to charitable causes, and if there's a community of like kind of very wealthy people who give large amounts, or if it's more like many small donations from kind of average citizens?
I think it's kind of both.
Okay.
My knowledge is not that good on it, but like we have a few like millionaires and like billionaires, I guess, which are like often in the newspapers, like giving like 2 million to the hospital or like to the local soccer club or something. And then also when, like, for example, this year or like last year, one of the biggest animal rights organizations in Norway, they have previously received funding from the government. But last year they cut it all. So they got like from some millions, I think, 2 million, 1 million, I think, like Norwegian kroner, so like $100,000. And then they cut it to zero. And then like the people, Norwegian gang was like, okay, we don't like that. So we made a Venmo or something like that, like a fundraising campaign. Yeah. And then the fundraising campaign got more money than what they got from government last year. Meaning, or like in how I see it, that yes, a lot of small people or like small donors also exist out there.
Okay, cool.
So both, I think.
Yeah, I mean fundraising strategy is a whole other long topic, but one thing I've seen working with groups all around the world is just the kind of context is so different for each country in terms of what kind of financial support for charity looks like in each region. Like in some places, like in the United States, the animal movement, there's like a large number of kind of major donors that fund a big portion of the groups. In addition to, of course, the huge population with small gifts. But we've seen a lot of rapid growth of organizations coming from major gifts from individuals or foundations. Whereas in some places, it's like a lot of, like at Vardaklaki and Poland, they grew from like these small membership fees over a very long time, which is like a much more stable approach to growth. But it's also hard work. It takes a very long time.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I guess we should check that more out at least, or like have the options available, because now I know if people going to donate to us, they have to like email us and like ask like, can I donate? And then we're like, yeah, sure, like I'll find our bank account.
Sounds like there's some room for growth here. Opportunity.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. Okay, some other external stuff. Okay. I have one. We're playing with this idea. So this has to do with like external stuff as well as like the fundraising thing. So we reached the governmental funding like requirements for youth organizations, like because like we're not a youth organization, or like we kind of are, but we have so many younger people in the organization, so we count as a youth organization, if that makes sense. And in Norway, that's like if we get 300 members under the age of 26 to pay this $5 membership fee one time a year, then we get government funding. And then you gotta have like 2 local chapters and like bylaws and stuff like that. So, but the hardest part is like getting those 300 people to become a member. The next step is like getting funding from the Ministry of Climate and Environment in Norway. But then you gotta have like 5,000 members. But then of any age, it could be a baby or like grandma. It doesn't matter.
Perfect.
Yeah, but it cannot be a dog or a cat.
Fair
like
enough.
People did that before. Like actually, the political parties had some drama around that here in Norway. So they were like cheating a lot. So then the government was like, okay, you no longer get money based on how many members, because there's too much cheating with their dogs and cats and so on.
Fair enough.
But the nonprofit sector, we can still like do it like that, or not with dogs and cats, but yeah. Anyways, so on the most, we've had like 683 members. and we're like playing with this idea, like, is it possible to reach 5,000 in like I want to say a year, but like what's really important if we were going to try to do that?
Well, tell me a little bit more about what the group does.
Okay. So World Saving Hustle, that's the name. And we work for like animal rights, environmentalism, and human rights. So like really broad spectrum. Our values in the organization are like, you can almost say like vegan values, but it's a really like holistically approach. That like working for animals is like good for nature and humans, and like working for nature is good for It's all connected and so on. And we also try to like follow some like effective altruism like principles and so on, but also seeing that it's kind of hard to do that because when we're so broad and get so many people in the organization, and as we for now don't have like a really good structure, it's really open for everybody. So we've had to add like EA 101s so people can understand effective altruism, if that makes sense. And we're really open to doing like whatever seems to be some of the most effective work we can do. But our local chapters, they can do whatever they want to do as long as they just follow our guidelines. So many of them end up doing like ocean cleanups, for example, or like those like reality, which is our type of like cube of truth and so on. And then we're like working to end whaling in Norway. And then we collaborate with the environmental organizations about getting like a moratorium on deep seabed mining, for example. But yeah, we're like now like really open to new projects as well. Maybe fish or something. We're not sure. Yeah.
So what are like the largest campaigns right now?
Deep seabed mining.
Okay. And how are you going about the campaign?
We are so for around a year ago, then like we collaborate with this international organization called Sustainable Ocean Alliance as well. And they work with like deep seabed mining internationally. And then we want to collaborate to work with the like Norwegian government, or like how we're doing the deep seabed mining here. And then we contacted the other environmental organizations which have much more resources than we do, and have like researchers which are specifically 100% hired to work on this topic. And we don't have that, like we're many volunteers and so on. So we mapped like where can we help, and we ended up on that like we're good to like mobilize people and spreading awareness. So in communication with them, we made like this small campaign video or like documentary almost about the topic, because we realized that not many people in Norway know what deep seabed mining is, and how quickly the Norwegian government is going through with this and not listening to like the Norwegian like science institutes and so on. So we have like interviewed those researchers, or like those knowledgeable people in the other organization like WWF and Friends of the Earth and so on, as well as deep seabed researcher. And then we joined this like collaborative group of where you have like one representative or more from each of the organizations. And right now the campaign is on hold because we all delivered this like what's that in English? Like the government has this hearing, and then you can
a hearing. A
hearing. So our hearing statement from all of the other organizations,
like testimony or something.
Something like that. So we had like at sometimes we had like those weekly meetings, check-ins with them, and like we have our campaign ready, and like the group is now like we are ready to launch it whenever we can. And the thing is that our campaign is that we have this campaign video, and in the end you can sign this petition, because in Norway it's like if somebody from the region has a petition and the petition gets over 500 signatures, then the regional council have to talk about it in the regional council. So we have 11 representatives now ready in all the Norwegian regions. So when this working group, which we're part of, says like, let's go, then we're going to launch the video, launch the petitions, and then get all the regions to take it up in their political.
Yeah, get the issue raised all over.
Yeah.
So when people sign the petition, are you giving them the chance to sign up as a member?
No.
Well, there you go. Step one. I mean, I think.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. But since that's a like collaborative thing, so it seems like if we should do it, then we also have to like say sign up to WWF, Friends of the Earth Norway, World Saving Hustle, and like all the organizations, because like we have that campaign, but we really do it together with all the other.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I think this idea of like getting to 5,000 members, I think this is like a very inspirational goal for the team. I don't know how many years it would take to get there. Like, you might have a better sense of this, but I do think like, do you have a strategic plan right now, like goals that you're tracking?
No, not really.
Okay. So
like we're just thinking about it.
I think that it sounds like one of the strengths of the organization is you have this very broad mission, and it sounds like there's kind of something for everyone, that like it would be, most people would probably be aligned with some elements of what you're doing. But this also presents a challenge where like, you're going to have to work hard to have like a focus of the programs that kind of like gives a real clear sense of like what the organization is doing, like what the like mission of the organization is. And I think that by choosing programs that are both, going to be broadly popular, but also have like a specific end goal. Like I think I love to hear the goals you're setting on like these tactics. Like we're going to be getting these 11 representatives to speak about this issue through gathering signatures. This is great. But I would really work on formulating maybe like a 3-year strategic plan of like what are our major objectives. And I think one element of this could be the getting to 5,000 members. So when you're starting to craft, like, okay, you start with these 3-year goals of, including the membership, you can make sure that the campaigns you're working on fit into the mission, but are also like topics that are going to bring people to the organization and get them to sign up as members. So like the presentation we saw at the conference from Bulgaria that talked about this, it was great, I thought, where they showed like I think it was cosmetic testing, anti-cosmetic testing. It's like a very popular issue that they were able to really leverage that, get good social media traction by working with influencers, and at every moment encouraging people to sign up to their mailing list. And I think they said they have like 120,000 person mailing list.
Oh shit!
Is it? Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge country, right? Like that is, it's crazy. It's totally crazy for a new group like that. And I think that it's like because they're very shrewd about looking for every opportunity, like identify their audience. What does their audience want? And I thought something they said in their presentation that was great. It's like they were not really highlighting the group so much. It was more about highlighting the person signing the petition and saying like, we need you. You're the person doing this. If we succeed, it's because of what you did here. And like, if you like the way this feels, basically sign up to be on the email list, more or less. And like making it about like, what are you providing to this member? Like what is like the service or what's the benefit that they're getting out of it? And I think that it sounds like you probably have a lot to offer folks who could become members. But I would think about like, how can you pitch things in this way and like give people as many opportunities to sign up? And I think there's often a trepidation about like, we don't want to ask people for money, or we're already asking them to sign a petition. We don't want to ask them to go further. But you just have to be fearless. Like I see this with a lot of the groups I work with who don't like fundraising. And they are it's very cultural as well. It depends on which country you're in, but like there's a discomfort around asking for money. But like, well, first of all, one way of framing this is like what we're giving people is an opportunity to do good. We're providing a service. Like people want to see positive change in the world. This is what we're allowing them to do with their money. And that this is like a very positive relationship to have. And it's not something that you should be nervous or ashamed about. Not saying that you are, but I see this with many activists. Yeah. And the same should be like, membership. This is an exciting thing. Like you get to be a member of a group that's changing the world in the way you want to see. Like that's awesome. Who doesn't want that?
Wow. Yeah. Okay. I also like to ask like if you have any like favorite recommendations of books and documentaries.
Well,
I have a picture of them on my phone for my presentation, but yeah.
Well, I guess I've got different categories. So the ones I mentioned in my talk, I'll mention again here.
Cool.
So there's this book called The Engagement by a journalist named Sasha Eisenberg. and it's a history of the victorious fight for same-sex marriage in the United States. And it was this, big controversial political fight for decades. And it went across, like mainstream politics and culture and society. And it's to me, it's just such a intensely detailed history of both sides that is so informative for activists who are working on social change. And living in the US and seeing the total shift from where the fight for gay marriage started, or same-sex marriage started, where it was like very mainstream for politicians to be extremely hostile towards this idea, and where I think it was like, just the kind of modal common belief among Americans was like, this is completely immoral and wrong.
Wow.
To see within decades this complete shift where now it's the opposite, where now it is like a cultural taboo for politicians to act like this, where the Republicans have essentially had to give this issue up, where the average American is totally fine with this. And to live through this and then read the detailed account of how it was accomplished and how thoughtful the activists had to be is so inspirational. And it does also a really interesting job of tracking the opposition side as well. So if for anyone who's like a student of history and social movements, to me, this is just like a triumph of journalism, this book that's come out. So I highly recommend that. One of the other books I mentioned, which also does have a section on the same marriage fight, is called Engines of Liberty. So this is about social movements that were able to change the Constitution or reinterpret the Constitution. And I think my favorite section in that book is about the National Rifle Association, actually. Is like this very powerful lobbying group in the United States for gun rights. So while I'm not exactly sympathetic to their cause, we still can learn quite a lot from them. And they do a great job in this book of showing how the NRA was able to leverage kind of like local grassroots organizations to create long-term political change by kind of starting on the local level and building up. And the other element of their strategy that's quite compelling is they focused a lot on this very long game of going and speaking in law schools and to students and shifting the way that the average law student perceived the Second Amendment about gun rights in the United States. So, the kind of NRA's position is American citizens should be able to have essentially any kind of gun, like the period, the broadest interpretation of the Second Amendment. And back when they were starting their work a few decades ago, even like a conservative or right-wing legal scholar would laugh at this and be like, this is ridiculous. This is not the correct interpretation. But they just started, they hired a few kind of like scholars who had this radical interpretation, sent them to law schools, had them speak consistently at these law schools, and just trained the next generation in how to think about this issue. And they were essentially successful in totally shifting a generation's perception on that side of the aisle. And I think that like we have a lot to learn from this as a movement, and like the value of long-term strategy and the value of kind of shifting the way that like the next generation of leaders are going to see issues. And this is something where I actually think the EA movement in some senses has done quite well, in that they've like have this great focus on young people and like bringing young people into their cause and focusing on investing in college students. But I think that sometimes they miss the investment in some of these longer term strategies, especially on animal issues, because everything is compared against like the short-term results of, say, like the corporate campaigns or something. So in some sense they succeed, and in some other senses I think they have some blind spots. So sorry, back to other recommendations. I mentioned The Fight in the Fields about Cesar Chavez. That's a book that's really good about his organizing of the farm workers. When it comes to books about kind of like management and leadership, I don't know if Andrea covered some of these, but Managing to Change the World is a book that we both like quite a bit from the Management Center. And there's another one. Nonprofit Life Cycles. I highly recommend. It's like this old textbook. It's about the different stages of growth that nonprofits go through and how to like look out for some of this like symptoms of problems and this kind of thing. I feel is very useful. It's a big recommendation.
Do you also find she talks a lot about the Management Center, I think it was.
Yes, right. So that's like a training organization in the US.
Yeah, or I think that was it. Or I'll check it out anyways.
It's great.
And leave all of this in the description. Yeah. Do you have any like pros and cons of like effective altruism? Like I really like, I've been in the EA movement for some years. And yeah, I really love it basically. but then at times, like we are talking about, like some pros and cons and how one can improve and so on. And I also don't feel that much as an EA, I think, because the work I do is not like super highly effective and so on. But I always say that I try to be more EA aligned, I guess. But yeah, do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very complicated. I think, I've always had a foot in that world because the Humane League and the kind of work that the Humane League does has always been kind of very appreciated by the EAs, let's say. And like I've had a lot of overlap with that community, and especially, the animal focus side of it. Yeah. And I think that, I mean, to me, the tremendous value that the EA mindset provides is just this, I guess the kind of foundational idea that some charities, some approaches, some strategies are going to be thousands of times more effective than others. I think that this is something that is like this kernel of truth that is, it's incredibly powerful to think about. And it's just such an important thing to remember that, having good intentions or working on a noble cause or being very dedicated and sacrificing a lot, all these things are fine virtues. But at the end of the day, for the animals we're trying to help or for any other change you're trying to make, what really matters is like how impactful are you being? And I think having this as a key element of thinking about your work is very important. But I think where EA can fall down is having this kind of like totalizing or maximizing approach that's very numerical, that can have this kind of like measurement bias. So I talked about this a little bit in my talk, but I think like when it comes to the animal work, the big flaw that I see is that, the approach to global health that EA had, where it was like identifying things like malaria nets and deworming as like these, orders of magnitude most effective things you could fund compared to other popular charities. Like that's an incredible approach to take. And that's because global health and development is just this enormous sector, and it involves national governments, multinational agencies, tens of thousands, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of charities around the world working on global health and development. I mean, it's like this giant sector. So they're like exploiting the top few interventions makes a lot of sense because you have this ocean of things to choose from. Yeah. You have tons of books and research written. Whereas you look at something like animal protection or animal rights, I mean, first of all, this is a very different kind of thing. It's a social movement. It's not about applying, interventions like healthcare. It's like experimenting in society. This is like a very hard to measure thing that's constantly changing, where it's like, finding causality is almost impossible. There's almost no resources. There's very few groups. So we're in a stage that's much more about exploration. And I think that, again, back to this kind of like this pearl of wisdom from the EAs, that some things are much better than others and that most things won't work. And that this is like the skeptical mindset we should have. That's very useful in a stage of exploration, because we should be really skeptical and self-critical about the causality of our programs and how effective we're being. But we should be much more open to risk than you would expect to be with, say, like their approach to global health and development. So I think that there's been just like too much of a focus on the top few interventions we've found so far, because the mindset for me is like, what are the interventions we haven't done yet that are going to be incredibly impactful in 15 or 20 years, and making sure that we're investing in like research and development essentially. Now, of course, I'm a huge fan of the corporate campaigns. Like this has been what I've spent most of my life doing. I think that it's important that the groups that are doing those continue to like maximize their impact through them. But I just want to see more openness to some of the other kinds of strategies that are out there, rather than like a myopic focus on what we know already works.
Awesome. Can I ask, what are your favorite bands now?
My favorite bands now,
but like artists.
I when I was like a teenager, I was much more into like the kind of like hardcore and punk scene, I guess. I think over time I shifted much more towards like extreme metal. So I think like my favorite band right now is a Brooklyn band called Krallis. Okay. That's like I don't know how to describe them. They're kind of like an experimental black metal band. I guess you're being in Norway. This is a good fit.
Yeah.
I think I like a lot of kind of like other extreme metal. Do you know the band Cattle Decapitation? They're like a vegetarian death metal band. Yeah, they're quite awesome. I think my favorite album of last year was a black metal album by a guy called Black Braid. It's like I think he's like a Native American artist. Made a very badass black metal album.
Cool.
I'm a huge fan of that. How about you? What are you into?
A lot of different. Like now, do you know the genre like funk?
Of course, yeah.
That's so awesome. Nice. I love like working out like really hard, like pushing like cardio or like running or like boxing or something, and then that's like, or like if I'm going to work a lot, I can just put that on and be like. Like, yeah, it's so cool. And other than that, like Gojira.
Cool. Yeah.
A lot, yeah. I love Gojira.
Yeah, they've got a good environmental message, right?
Yeah, they do. And also a lot of rap. So it's like rap or heavy metal or funk.
Nice.
Like those.
That's a good mix. Very balanced.
Yeah. Nice. Do you have any other thoughts or last comments?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for saying yes.